introduce our speaker for Ag-vocacy of small ag, Caylie Holman with Oklahoma Farm Bureau. Caylie works for Oklahoma Farm Bureau as a field rep serving South Central Oklahoma farmers and ranchers. In addition, she's a member of the Farm Bureau public policy team that works with state lawmakers to advance the interests and improve the lives of rural Oklahomans. So Caylie, you can go ahead and get started.
Okay, so like she said, I work for a Farm Bureau. I see a couple of friendly faces that I've seen around. I've been with the team for about 2 years. Prior to that, I worked for Senator Lankford in DC, worked on his legislative team before moving back to Oklahoma. I grew up in the Tecumseh area, went to college at Southwestern and Weatherford, and now I live in Asher, Oklahoma. So today we're going to be talking about advocacy for small ag, and I will just preface that with that we're not going to be partisan. We're not going to talk specifically about any bills that are at the state level or the federal level. If you guys have questions, please feel very free to stop and ask me. So this is not just specifically asking your legislator for a yes or a no vote. That certainly is how we want to end with advocacy. But this is more of kind of educating, especially in our industry. There's a lot of misconceptions when you talk about agriculture and what we really do. So a lot of times in our industry specifically, this is going to start out with telling your story. So this is kind of a unique thing where probably in this room we have a diverse group of commodities, and also from big to small ag, we're going to vary a lot. So telling your personal story is going to really help when you are advocating for your industry. We want to make sure that we are portraying our industry in a positive way. So something you're probably going to hear me reiterate a lot during this is that when you are advocating, whether it's on behalf of agriculture or any different industry you might ever be a part of, it's really important to make sure that you keep a good reputation for yourself in your industry, because it really doesn't take much to get a negative name going. That's just really not something that we want when we are trying to get a legislator at the end of the day to vote a specific way on a bill. So we're going to start out with this is influencing decision makers. Maybe this is your state rep, your congressional delegate, or maybe this is just somebody that's in your city, your commissioner, your mayor, trying to get them to vote a certain way or make certain policy decisions that are going to better impact you and our industry. Champion an issue too. A lot of times when it comes to agriculture, we are property owners, we take care of livestock, so those are usually some pretty big issues, especially when we're talking about property taxes, things like that, that as an agriculturalist that you're going to be championing, and that a lot of times you're kind of the only person or the only industry that's out there really fighting for some of these issues. A lot of people, especially as things are getting a lot more urban, this is going to be something that you're going to see is going to be more difficult to advocate on behalf of, is this agriculture industry in your way of life. Building support. At the end of the day, even if they can't support you on a certain bill, you want to make sure that you're building those relationships, keeping them pretty strengthened, because in a week or two, maybe next month, maybe next year, you might need them on a different issue that they can be supported of. So making sure that you're building that support, keeping that education line running smoothly. And then it is action directed, because you do, when you're advocating, when you're taking time off of your farm, it's usually because you need someone to feel a certain way, promote a certain bill or policy. So it is something that you're going to want them to take action at. Okay, so what can advocating do? It's going to influence public policy, opinion, and or practice. So when community members like yourselves get together, or an interest group, like agriculture, whether that's your organic farming, whether that's a larger farming, whether this is just specifically cattle, cotton, wheat, there's a lot of different, especially in Oklahoma, we have a lot of groups that work together on specific commodities to advance your interests. So being a part of those groups can be really helpful when you're trying to get a larger piece of legislation or policy moved, because you're working together and it shows that there's a broader coalition, not just maybe one person that feels this way. So when you can, working together in a community or working together with a group of like-minded individuals is going to strengthen your position, and it's going to get you heard a little bit more. So now we're going to talk about how to advocate. So first way is signing petitions. Especially in Oklahoma, we have seen this a lot in the past couple of years. Initiative petitions to get state questions on the ballot have been a pretty popular thing. We've got a couple this year that have come up, whether that's gone to courts or are getting placed on ballots this year that when we go to the ballot box in June and November, we're going to see. So signing a petition can be an effective way to get some sort of advocacy going. Sometimes it's not a petition to get like a state question on a ballot. Maybe it's just sending a letter to one of your representatives, just having that signatory. A lot of times, especially if you're an influential member of your community or your industry, that can be a really effective way to contact a legislator, contact a policymaker. And then contacting someone. There's some main ways to contact your legislator representatives. By phone, by email, or just by a handwritten letter. Those can be extremely effective. And when we talk about you contacting a legislator or an influencer in your area, a couple of main things that we want to make sure that we do. You want to leave your name. You want to make sure and leave your address so that they know you're a constituent. When I was working for Senator Lankford, you would see that a lot, that you would have somebody from Colorado call, or just somebody that particular representative was not, did not represent, it was not one of their constituents. And we'd also have several people that when we tried to get them to leave an address, they just want to know part of it. And a lot of times when that happened, we don't know that you're a constituent, so we're probably not going to pass that memo along because there are a lot of constituents that we can verify are Oklahomans, or if we're talking about, the House, that they know that you are a constituent. So those are the people that send their representatives to Washington or to the state capitol, and those are the people that they're going to spend their time on. So making sure that you leave that address not only for a response, but making sure that that they're your representative, that you're their constituent, is going to be very impactful. Leave a phone number. A lot of times it's going to be difficult to send a letter back to you, and if you do, especially at the national level, it's probably going to be a form letter that's just like very generic. So if you can leave a phone number, you're more likely, especially at the state level, to get that phone call back from your legislator, that's a lot more personal than a letter is. You can ask them further questions if maybe you weren't able to at the beginning. So that's just for sure a better way to get contacted back. Also, make it personal. This is something we're kind of talking about at the beginning of this session, that a lot of times in our industry in particular, it's about telling your story. So if you call somebody and say, I want you to vote yes on Senate Bill 1211. I don't even know what that has to deal with, but I'm sure it's an actual bill going on right now. If you're talking to somebody that really cares, they're going to ask you some more information about how that might impact your life. And if you just say, well, I don't know, Farm Bureau or Cattlemen's or somebody like that just told me to call and tell you to vote no. Okay, great. Like we're gonna take your opinion, because at the end of the day, especially if you're a constituent, that matters to us. But if you say this is going to negative impact me and my operation because, and tell them, that's going to go a lot further with a representative, especially at the state level, because your constituency is so much smaller, and that is going to, those people that are taking their time to call on an issue, and this is how it matters to me, is going to be a lot more influential than just, we had 45 people call and say no, and we had 55 call and say yes. So if you can tell someone specifically how this is going to impact you, especially in our industry where the people that we're sending to the Capitol are a lot more urban than they are rural. And so not all of your operations, but a lot of your operations are going to be more rural areas, because that's where we kind of do our lives. But if you can kind of call them, tell them how that's going to impact you, they're more likely to understand, because a lot of them didn't grow up on a farm. Most people right now are about three generations removed from a farm. So if you can call and tell this legislator that might represent your area but lives in Edmond, lives in Bartlesville, if you can tell them how this impacts you, they're going to be more likely to give you a favorable vote. When we talk about meeting a legislator, you want to make sure that you're kind of keeping your groups pretty small, especially at the state level. Those offices are pretty small. They're brand new this year, so if you guys get a chance to go up to the Capitol, you for sure should, because there's some nice offices. But if you come in with about 10 people, there's no way that you are going to be able to all fit inside of their office. You also, when you meet in larger groups, it's very easy for the conversation to get carried away pretty quickly. So if you go in with just 2 or 3 people that from your industry, from your community groups, if you go in with just a few people, it's a lot easier to keep the conversation moderated. If you have some points that you're going in there to talk to them about a specific bill, maybe a couple of specific issues, it's going to be a whole lot easier to talk with that representative, to get your point across, rather than going in with 10 people that are all fighting for a voice in the room. Maybe somebody wants to talk about the grandkids, and all of a sudden, we've all been in those conversations where all of a sudden we're 10 feet off the rails. So keeping those groups smaller, setting clear talking points, knowing why you're going into somebody's office, why you're meeting with a policymaker is going to be a lot more helpful than, and earlier we kind of talked about, earlier we talked about knowing specific bills that you want somebody to kind of that you want to talk to them about. Knowing, again, why you're wanting a specific issue is going to be 10 times more helpful than just going in and listing off a clear action points with no real reason, no knowledge really about what a specific bill would do. Also make it short. A lot of times these people do not have that much time in their day. They've got, caucus meetings, they have bills that they're hearing on the floor. So if you can go in there, kind of keep it short, they're going to have a lot more respect for your time. Have a clear opening and a clear closing, knowing when it's kind of about time to leave, knowing how you want to open up is going to be effective. Always be courteous. This is personally a pet peeve of mine, is you have, especially when you get larger groups, it's easy to be really negative or try to force a legislator or policymaker into a certain vote on your behalf. And at the end of the day, even though you're a constituent, they're a lawmaker, and that does deserve some sort of respect. So being courteous of their time, even if you do disagree, understanding their points that they're trying to make, listening well, even if they disagree on a specific issue, when you need them in a week or a month, if you were a courteous constituent, ask them respectfully for a vote and listen to why maybe they couldn't vote a certain way, is going to be helpful for you when maybe you do need them, because you're probably not as likely to get back in an office if you're being disrespectful to somebody. Also, it's really important to make the ask at the end of your conversation. If you go in, maybe you do talk to them about a couple of bills, how they specifically affect your way of life and your industry, making sure that you are very clear about, we want a yes vote, we want a no vote. We might think it's pretty clear on how we are setting up how this is going to impact our industry, but making sure that they know that we want a yes or a no vote. And also, if you can, talk to them about the bill number, but also talk to them about maybe the bill title. A lot of legislators, especially at the state level, when you have like some 4,500 bills, they don't know every single bill. So if you go in and say, I want to talk to you about House Bill 1211, they probably have no idea what that bill even deals with. So making sure that, make sure and follow up with them. Did the senator or the representative get my memo? Did they vote a certain way? We'll talk a little bit later in this session about how you can find out for yourself which way somebody voted. But making sure and following up with them, keeping that good contact, because you're probably going to need them a little bit later on. Any questions right now? Oh, I do want to also mention this. We talk about this a little bit at Farm Bureau, but when you go to meet a legislator, if a legislator was coming to talk to you out on your place and they showed up in a suit and tie, you're probably going to cock a few eyebrows, kind of wonder what they're doing. So when you go to talk to them at their place of work, make sure that, we're probably not showing up in our overalls. Maybe that's the way that we might feel the most comfortable, but showing up, dress a certain way. You don't have to put on a 3-piece suit, but looking professional in their place of work, because the Capitol is a professional place. So we're talking about ineffective advocacy tactics, excuse me. This first one I want to talk about is keeping it short. If you were to write a letter, we'll start there. If you're writing a letter and it's 4 pages long, people don't have time to look at something that is that long. You probably put a lot of time and effort and a lot of good points into that letter, but keeping it succinct. If you're writing a letter, 1 page, maybe 1.5 pages, but if you're doing something that's 4 or 5 pages, a whole document, it's unlikely to get read, and if it is getting read by their LA or their EA, which is their legislative assistant and executive assistant, that's the person that sits out front and is kind of their guardian of their office. They're probably the ones that are going to read this first, and if it's this thick, it's not getting passed on to the legislator, and that means that our end goal was not met because they're not hearing our points, they're not knowing that we even cared on an issue. This next one, kind of yelling, we talked about that being courteous. If you're going to yell at a legislator, you're probably never getting back into their office. I know yesterday it happened at our state capitol that there was a constituent that came in and about got in a screaming match with a legislator, and he very specifically told his legislative assistant that person was not allowed back in the office, and that this was also somebody that was not even one of their constituents, was somebody from Chicago. So don't be disrespectful to somebody. It's not going to get you back in the office. It's not going to get the vote the way you wanted it, and it's certainly not going to get any friendlies later on when you need their help again. So contacting your legislator, we talked about sending letters, sending emails, oklegislator.go, and then you can kind of see the full hyperlink right there. But this is what you would see if you went to this page, and you can see kind of on the pictures that I've posted, if you were to, it's going to ask you to put in your address. I'm talking like the street address, the zip code, everything. So if you put that in, it's going to show you who your legislators are in the state and at the federal level. So I put in mine, and you can see, obviously, for our whole state, it's James Langford, Jim Inhofe, and then I have the 5th Congressional District, so you see Kendra Horn, and then it has my senator and my representative, so you can see everybody that represents you. And then if you click on their name, you're going to see their address, you're going to see an email that you can send your thoughts to, and you're also going to see their phone number. So you have every method that you might want to contact them, you've got that information right there. And then also a little bit maybe more beneficial is that you can see their personal information, but you can also see the committees that they sit on. So if you have a specific issue, know which way it's going, you can talk with, you know what committees, what subcommittees, things like that they sit on. And those are areas that they're going to be a little bit more influential rather than just a regular floor vote where they're voting yes or no. They're going to have a lot more say in their committee, especially if they're a chair or a vice chair. So that's for sure something to take a look at when you're trying to contact your representatives. Legislative process. So this is specifically for the Oklahoma legislator. You can see up there we've got 101 House members, 48 Senate, and this is just kind of the different breakdown of their terms. Both of them right now in the state are Republican held. Likely probably not going to change soon, whichever way you feel about that. That's just kind of the fact of the matter. And also another important thing to look at is the amount of freshmen that we have. So in Oklahoma we have term limits, so no one serves more than 12 years. But this is the highest amount of freshmen that we've ever had at the state level. So this is a lot of people, one, that are trying to make a mark. If you've got 12 years to get to your end goal, whether that's a floor leader, a committee chair, you don't have that long to get there. And when you're battling, especially in the House, with 46 other people, that's a lot of people that are trying to ramrod bills and really make a name for themselves. So watching those individuals, we'll see later kind of how to find different bills in the state, but watching those freshmen, especially if they're one of your representatives, is going to be a good way to kind of see what hot issues there are in your communities, because these people are for sure listening to their constituents because they're brand new, don't usually have a place in leadership yet, and are trying to make a name for themselves. So they're really listening to you to see what bills can I run that is going to put me in the light. So anyway, that's just kind of something to look at. Legislative session, we just started last Monday, so we're currently on our second week right now. Generally on even number years is what we are. It starts the first, it says in here, first Monday in February at noon. That's different for odd numbers because we have to confirm the statewide election. So in those odd number years, next year, 2021, 2023, you're going to see that happening in January. And then also an important thing to note is that it has to be done the last Friday in May. So unlike the federal level where we're making laws all year, this is a short session. And we also have a lot of different deadlines that you have to meet. So the 27th of this month, every bill has to be out of committee. So if there's a bill that has not been passed by the committee, that means it effectively dies. And it's not going to be heard this session. And then there's a couple of others about when it has to be out of the chamber, when it has to go to the opposing chamber. So those are important things to know if there's a specific piece of legislation that is important to you. It's good to know what those deadlines are and where your bill is in that process so you can contact the right people to move it out of committee and move it out of the chamber. That's a good way to start, especially if you have one of those freshman members. That's a good place to start with them, telling them about your kind of what you're needing, what your issue is, and working on with them to write legislation. And a lot of times, especially in committee and sometimes even on the floor, there will be good questions about where those bills come from, so everyone's aware. Did this come from a constituent? Did this come from a special interest group? But those constituent ones are for sure important because those are real people that are needing something done. The request of the governor. Sometimes it's national model legislation, something that the federal level is doing or something that another state's doing well, and that legislation is usually just copy and pasted into Oklahoma. Interim studies are a big one where those come from as well. So here's the path of the bill. This top one is really more of Oklahoma, and this bottom section is more of how a federal bill gets passed. We're not really talking about federal that much, but it could be, if that's something you're interested in, there's some more stuff online that you can go to take a look at. But it's for sure simpler for the state legislator from a bill to be introduced and get passed than it is at the federal level. But first we have the first reading, then we've got the second reading, committee assignment. And these first and second readings are not really where they get up at the speaker's podium and read a bill. It's really just kind of introduced. And then it gets assigned to committee, which can, that's a choice of the speaker or the pro tem along with some floor leaders. But that can really kind of make or break a bill. So knowing what committee makeups are, what those look like can be helpful to you if there is a specific constituent request for a bill. Knowing where it would be more ideal for you to have a bill for it to get passed out of that committee is going to be important. So then we have hearings, third reading, chamber vote. The committee hearings, those are pretty popular right now because, like I said, the February 27th is the last day for a bill to get out of committee. And this is also the second session of the 50, well, I don't even know what legislator we have. But anyway, it's the second session. Last year was the first session, so next year we'll start completely over. So bills that were introduced last year but were laid over, those were able to come back this year and are still being heard, which is one of the reasons we have so many. But next year we'll have to start all over from scratch. So right now there's a really big push to get those out of committee so they don't die and have to come back next year. Thank you. So in those committee hearings, usually a legislator that ran the bill is going to get up and talk about, briefly summarize what the bill is about. There's questions. This is a lot of times where it comes up, where did this originate? Was it from an agency, a special interest group? Do you have a constituent that's dealing with this? A lot of the questions are going to happen right here. And then if it's going to, be a do pass, or it can be if they vote it down, that bill effectively dies there. But if it's a do pass, then we go to the third reading, which is it finally being submitted to the floor, and then it can be on the agenda for a chamber vote. I'm sure this is probably a lot of stuff that you guys, I'm a little more in the weeds than I need to be. But anyways, does anybody have any questions on how that bill process works? That for sure varies. There's certain amount of time that it could not go before, like there's usually like a 24-hour period. The first reading, it has to wait a whole 24 hours before there can be a second reading, and at that second reading, that's when it effectively is assigned to committee, and then the committee could hear it the very next day, debate it, and then it could go for a third reading, and it has to be filed, wait another 24 hours so everybody knows that this has been filed, we're going to be debating this, does there need to be an amendment process, that kind of a thing, and then it goes to the House or the Senate floor, and then it can pass to the next chamber where it does this exact same thing all over again. So we saw last week that the first bill was passed out of the Senate, no, the House. I think it's passed out of the House, regardless. It was done so quickly because we only started on Monday. It was done so quickly because it was passed out of committee the previous year. So we talked about this as the second session of this legislature, and that next year it would have to be completely introduced, but that was just a carryover bill from last year, so that's why it was able to be introduced so soon. Does that answer your question at all? Sometimes it takes a really long time. Sometimes it might sit in committee until, we've got to get things out on the 27th. It might sit in committee, be passed, then go to finally go to the floor, sit there, probably, a lot of these never get heard on the floor. So some of them can take a long time. It depends a lot on what the appetite of leadership is, what, the floor leader, what a chairman or the pro tem or the speaker kind of thinks. So this is the federal process, and a main difference here is that when we send our bills to committee, it's usually a pretty quick process. You introduce it, you talk. There was a committee that met today, and there was probably 15 to 20 bills that were heard in about as much time. It was like a very quick process. But at the federal level, they're often criticized for how slow things move, which is maybe not always a bad thing. But there it's a full committee markup. So here there might be a bill and you can get a couple of things changed before the committee passes it. Maybe you get an amendment on the floor. But here when you sit in a committee, if this is our committee and I was introducing a bill to you, we can all talk about issues that we might have with it and slash things out and do things there, where at the state level it's more of a amendment process, if that makes sense. So tracking legislation, OK State Legislator, you can see Senate bills and House bills here. So if you were to go to this website, you click on legislation, go to a basic bill search, and you can just simply put in, House Bill 1211, kind of whatever you're wanting to look at, and see information on the bill. You can get a paraphrase, just like a quick synopsis of what this bill is trying to do. If you want to really get in the weeds and love legislation, you can read legislative text, legal text. That is a lot more difficult if you're not practicing it, because a lot of times it has a specific code of law and it says, like slash after the period, extend to a comma, things like that are a lot more difficult, and usually you have to have a 100-page piece of code sitting next to you to really see what it's trying to accomplish. But looking at kind of the paraphrase is going to be a lot simpler to see what the bill is really trying to do. You can also see where it's at. You can see right here where it has the first reading, which usually happens the first day of the legislature, and first reading, enters it in, has to wait 24 hours, then it can be given for a second reading. And you can also see if it goes to committee, if it was passed from committee, if it's gone, which committee it's in, which is helpful if you're trying to contact a chairman, or if you're trying to get something killed in committee or passed through committee, knowing what representatives or what senators sit on that committee, so you can directly call them to ask for something. That's a little bit different than what earlier we were talking about, are you a constituent? If you call a committee person, you don't always necessarily need to be a constituent. If you're calling for something that's on the finance committee, knowing who is on that committee and calling them to ask for something specific is okay. You can also see if somebody co-authored it. You can see any amendments that have been given. You can see votes. This is probably a bigger issue at the federal level than it is for the state level, but especially special interest groups like to look at who voted which way on a specific issue, so they can really hound you if you voted against them, and tell all their members that we're ousting you next year. So that's like a little bit more effective at the federal level instead of the state. Any questions on looking for a specific bill? On here you can also put, if you're not sure what a bill is, you can usually put in like some text, like I know it has to do with pharmacy and tax, put those words in there and it can populate bills that might be dealing with that issue. This was just a quick screenshot of what it looks like if you were trying to figure out who voted with you or voted against you. This will show right here. This isn't that helpful because everybody voted yes, except for people that voted excused. But anyway, so if you could look at this page right there if you're wanting to know if somebody voted against a specific bill, and maybe if that's your representative, wanting to talk with them about why they might have done that, expressing your opposition to that issue. But keeping track of that way is helpful. And you can also see co-authors right there. Every bill has to have an immediate author, but if somebody really supports an initiative or someone's constituent really supports an initiative, a lot of times they'll co-author those bills. That's really kind of all I have. Does anybody have any questions on anything? No? Sorry if I got too in the weeds on anything. Okay, well, thank you all very much. I appreciate your time and allowing me to be here. If you guys do have any further questions, again, I do work for Farm Bureau. You don't have to be a member if you have anything that I might be able to help you on. Here's my contact info right there. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you so much, Caylie.